So happy you joined us. In the holiday season, so many of us are concerned about gifts for each other and all types of love and pouring out of friendship from family to family. What happens in other parts of the world? What about in the areas where there was a period of time not too many years ago where people ate each other, the cannibals? And we're going to hear more about that if you happen to be at the United
with Thanksgiving in your heart and give him
Ian. So happy you joined us. In the holiday season, so many of us are concerned about gifts for each other and all types of love and pouring out of friendship from family to family. What happens in other parts of the world? What about in the areas where there was a period of time not too many years ago where people ate each other, the cannibals? And we're going to hear more about that if you happen to be at the United Methodist Church Circle meeting just recently. You heard this person talk about a peace child, a book that's written, Gerry Barnes. Gerry, welcome to Vision Plus.
Thank you so much, Bonnie. It's always a pleasure to be with you, and I really thank you for inviting me here today.
Well, it's exciting, the things that you're involved in, and so tell us about the Peace Child. First of all, it is a book that's...
Yes. This is the cover of the book, The Peace Child by Don Richardson, and I became familiar with this book, Bonnie, about 8 years ago, because I've got a little niece that's a nurse in California, and she became acquainted with Don and Carol Richardson. They're missionaries, and Debbie was very interested in following in their footsteps. So she suggested that all of the family read The Peace Child. And I must tell you that it was a book that was very hard to put down because of the message that it bore.
And they were missionaries to, now, where they went, Netherlands, New Guinea.
Yes, Netherlands, New Guinea.
It's close to Australia.
Yes.
Let's show it.
Right here we go.
Where the
just north of Australia. It's a very dark continent, and the Swawi people were just one tribe of very many. In fact, approximately 400 tribes in that particular area. And like you mentioned before, they were cannibalistic headhunters as late as, or actually as early as 1962.
Mm-hmm. So we don't think that that happened just so recently.
Right.
So, well, tell me what happened with Don and Carol Richards and how they came to write the book, Peace Child.
Well, in 1962, like I said, they made a trip to New Guinea. They took their 2-little-year-old son with them, which is kind of hard to imagine, but they wanted to go as a family to take the gospel to the Swahi people. They built their home along a little riverbank, and 3 other Swahi tribes built their villages alongside of them. In fact, actually almost encamping their home. The Swawi people were different than even a lot of the other tribes in the area, because they viewed treachery as somehow an ideal. In fact, they would go and befriend a person just so that they could later on kill that person and eat them. So that's a pretty frightening thought, and naturally the Richardsons had to have a lot of faith to go into that particular part of the country. There was an expression for this, and it was called to fatten with friendship for the slaughter. And this was a way of life for the Swahi for centuries, possibly millenniums of time.
That's probably where we get our expression with pigs growing up on the farm. You
That's right.
fattened your pigs for the slaughter.
That's right, exactly. And that's
and they did that with people.
Yes, yes. was two ideals, though, that they shared with the Richardsons. And that was that they believed in a supernatural world. And they believed that it was very important to share that supernatural world with themselves, with mankind. The difference was that the Swahi believed in malicious demons and the departed spirits of the dead. But the Richardsons believed in an infinite yet personal God that showed a lot of mercy and a lot of justice. So there was a big difference there. And actually, the Richardsons were very surprised to find that the Swahi had such an intensive vocabulary. And I was too when I read the book. But in all of this vocabulary of theirs, they had no word for God.
No word
No
for
word
a
for
supreme
God.
being, even though they believed in the supernatural, but it was the evil demons.
It was all evil, no good. There were many attempts by the Richardsons to try to explain the Christianity message to the Swahi, and even though they tried all sorts of ways, they just weren't able to reach them. So one day, Don was talking to them about Judas, thinking maybe that he could spark some interest and maybe reach them a little bit with that story, but it worked out to be quite the opposite.
How is that, Gerry?
Well, even though Judas walked with Christ for 3 years, and he ate with him, he traveled with him, you know, in the end, he betrayed Christ. But to them, this was just wonderful. He was a super Swahi because he was able to carry out this form of treachery, and they actually viewed him as the hero of the story. You know, the Swahi, Bonnie, their fighting instincts were just so ingrained in them that just a mere drop of a word could cause whole villages of men to become armed with arrows and weapons, and they would go to war just almost on a spur of the moment. They were ready for battle. So the Richardsons had their work cut out for them, and they were very concerned that while they were there, that there was going to be bloodshed and possibly someone killed. And in fact, for 5 months, they ended up bandaging bloody wounds. They gave hundreds of penicillin shots. They tried to reason, cajole, they prayed, they shouted till they were hoarse, did everything they could to prevent bloodshed. And then it dawned on them, you know, where someone perceives hostility as a way of life, that there really could be no peace. So they sort of gave up. They decided to go to the head of the different villages and explain to them that they were just going to leave. They were going to go and try a mission field somewhere else.
The Swahi people did not try to eat Carol and
no.
the Richardsons.
Well, you see, they perceived them as so unusual, and the things that they brought with them, that they were sort of
like a god,
like a god to them. So no, they were quite safe, except for the fact that Don and Carol did at times wonder, well, are they fattening us up with friendship for the slaughter? And I'm afraid I would have felt the same way. But no, they were safe among them. In fact, they did not want them to go at all. They begged them to stay.
Because they knew they were giving them the penicillin shots,
well,
helping them get
more than that, even axes to chop wood with, and knives, and that sort of thing. So that they did not want to lose that. But also, I think that the Richardsons had really become a part of their lives. They promised them if they would just stay, that they would make peace the very next day. And Don and Carol went to bed that night and they said, there's no way. These people do not know how to make peace.
How did they
Well, the next morning, they got up and there was a man with a child on his back, and he was trying to make his way to the opposing tribe. And all of a sudden, out of nowhere, his wife, with a supernatural strength, wrestled him to the ground, got their son away from him, ran back to their home. There were several attempts, actually, by different villagers to get this act accomplished, and each time something would happen. Well, finally, one villager, and his name was Ko, he just very silently slipped away, went back to his home, gathered up his little 6-month-old child. It was his son, the only child they had, and was able to make his way to the opposing tribe before his wife intercepted him or anyone else. And when he got there, before he handed his child over, he said...
What was the purpose of doing that?
Well, we're getting to that. When he was prepared to hand his son over, he asked the question, though, will you speak the words of peace among your people? They answered yes. And then he asked for a certain man named Mahon to come forward because he felt like this man would take good care of his son. And when he handed him his son, he also gave him his name. And then another villager from the opposing tribe came forward with his son to hand over to Ko. And he asked Ko, he said, Ko, will you speak the words of peace among your people? And when Ko agreed, then he handed him his son and his name. When Ko got back to his village, then every villager there laid hands on that child. And in essence, they were saying, we are going to take very good care of this child, even more so than their own children, because they felt like once something happened to that child, if that child should ever die, that the peace was no longer valid. The peace could be broken. So you can see how important it was to keep that child well and happy and healthy. Well, anyway, after that, once he got back to his village and all of the hands were laid on, then the rest of the villagers exchanged gifts and they exchanged names. And then, very interestingly enough, I know you're going to pick up on this because I think it's got a wonderful title. They did a you and me and I and you dance.
Wow.
And we know
you and
where
me,
that
I and you.
You and me and I and you dance. It was a peace dance.
It's amazing that they learned to give, even just prior to that with Judas Iscariot as the one they thought was the, you know, the hero that they looked for. Now, what happened next?
Well, Dan, which is the name for white man in Swahili, asked the villagers, says, why is this necessary? And they said, well, Dan, you have been asking us to have peace for a long time now. Don't you realize you can't have peace without a peace child? But little did Don know that by his asking for peace, that fathers would give up sons, that he would plunge mothers into grief, and children into strangeness. But that's exactly what happened, because that was the only way that these people felt like there could be peace. The peace child protected more than their own. And the peace, like I said before, would not be binding if anything happened to it. So you can see how very important that was. And every demonstration of friendship was suspect except for one. And they decided that if a man would actually give up his son to the enemy, that man could be trusted. After all of this had taken place, the Richardsons said, aha, this is the key. This is the answer to our prayer. Now we have a chance of reaching these people. And they did decide to stay. In fact, after about 2 months, Don approached them again. He went into their man house where all their meetings were held. And he started out by saying, oh, that you would not have to go through such a painful process. I just kept thinking, wouldn't it be wonderful if they didn't have to go through this giving of a son? But he said, then I got to thinking, you know, our Father decided there was no way to have peace either without a peace child. And so you can see where I'm headed with this story. He said that true peace can never come out without a peace child, because he wants man to find peace with him and with each other. And therefore, he chose a one-for-all peace child that was good enough and strong enough that would hold the peace forever.
And not have to take the chance on being destroyed.
Yes.
Even though he went to the grave for us when our Heavenly Father gave the peace child to us, Jesus Christ.
Yes.
But he will not,
well,
fear is not there.
And Don explained to them, he said there's only one problem that God had with this. Who was he going to send? Because no human child would be good enough or strong enough to bind the peace forever. And that's when he looked to his own son. And he asked Caio, he said, Caio, did you give another man's son, or did you give your own? And not just Caio, but all of the villagers responded by saying, he gave his own.
And his only son.
And his only son. That's right. But even though he just had the one son, he gave him anyway. And then Don continued, hear now what the truants say about a peace child from God. And he opened up his Bible and he translated into Swawi Isaiah's prophecy. Unto us a child is born, unto us a child is given, and the government shall be upon his shoulders, and his name shall be called Wonderful, Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, the Prince of Peace. And then he followed with John's Gospel, for whosoever believeth, for God so loved the world, that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth in him should not perish, but have everlasting life. Isn't that a wonderful message?
And then what happened with the people?
Well, they asked him, they said, this is the one you've been telling us about? Jesus? And Don answered, the very one. And after that, after thinking about it for a little while, they said, well, he's the one that Judas betrayed. And if he's the peace child, that was a very bad thing to do. The very worst thing, in fact, that you could do. And Don, of course, was so very pleased, because from that moment on, Judas became a villain instead of the super Swahi that they had built up in their minds.
And now they could comprehend the peace child of the Son of God.
Yes.
Lord Jesus
and not
Christ.
only that, but as Don continued to minister to them, he mentioned the fact that even though they had gone to sprinkle cool water on one another by exchanging peace children, that our God sent his Son not just for one people, but for all the people of the world. And of course, that was a very important message for them to have too. And then he said, how can we receive him? By welcoming his Spirit into your heart. When a spirit dwells in your heart, God gives you his name. And that name is exchanged with God. So, you see, by linking names, they were accepting Christ for his sake, and it went along with their you and me and I and you peace dance, so that they could understand.
So the people, they probably gave their lives to the Lord Jesus Christ, so they would no longer have to give a physical peace child of their own.
Bonnie, one by one, they yielded to Christ and became believers. Christ is just so good. And Christmas soon followed, and carols were being sung, and they were praising God for sending them his son. And at the close of the service, a Swahi minister got up, and he translated for the service, which Don had given to him. For unto us a child is born, unto us a child is given. And these words sank in and welcomed with perception and insight, perhaps something that is really rare even among us Western Christians, because you see, we get so caught up, like you were saying at the beginning of the program, with exchanging presents and all of this sort of thing that goes into our holidays. But the Swahi, that had no meaning for them whatsoever. They were worshiping God and actually adoring the peace child, because they realized that the peace child, not only born in Bethlehem, but within their hearts as well, had come for them. And Tu and Don closed the book by saying this was the best Christmas he had ever had.
And everyone can have that same Christmas.
That's right.
That's right. So no matter what the external things are that are happening in a person's world, you know, because there's so many changes from year to year, and sometimes it would be good if we could comprehend that type of where Judas was the star. And
that's right.
And that's the way our lives are lived a lot of times, that sin or whatever our Judas is has been our God. We've looked to all kinds of things, worship of money or drinking, or I was thinking about, while you were talking, see what was happening over there in the 60s in the Swahi country, and here in the United States and many places in the world. That's when all the flower children and the drug culture, and it's so amazing what was happening there. But it was like a period of time when people were looking and changes were made, and a lot of those flower children and druggies from the 60s are some of our strongest people. So Carol and Don Richardson, by writing The Peace Child, was able to convey their message to us.
Yes, yes.
As well as our message to the Swahi people. And
Bonnie, I just thought perhaps your viewers might be interested in a little bit of a follow-up on the Richardsons.
I would like to hear
and
what's happened to them.
They are both teaching at the Fuller Theological Seminary in Pasadena, California. And the last time my little niece visited them, their 13-year-old son, who had been born in the jungle of New Guinea, was taking pilot lessons so that he could go back over there and help by being a pilot, flying in and out. So
because a lot of times they don't have the roads and the transportation to go from village to village.
No,
so
not
the
at all.
only thing that they can do is have the opportunity to fly from place to place.
Flying or by boat.
Because I remember in Waco, Texas, we had a thing that, it was a ministry actually called Wings for Christ, and that's what they did. They trained missionaries to fly so they could fly from village to village. And whether it was Nigeria or wherever it was, of course, some of those countries have very large cities over in the African countries, but there in Australia, well, actually this was north of Australia.
Yes, it was actually, of course, not on the Australian continent, but just to the north there.
Netherlands. And what's it called now?
West Aryan.
West Aryan.
Yes.
And those people, I don't suppose there's any place that you know of that's still cannibalistic that I'm aware of at the moment.
Well, certainly not that.
Not that group, anyway.
Not that I'm aware of.
They've received Jesus Christ, and I suppose they're going on with their learning.
Yes.
There must have been Bibles translated in their language.
Yes, and Bonnie, what I think is so wonderful, too, if I can just find the picture here for our viewers, because before the Richardsons left New Guinea, they were able to build a house of worship and I don't know if we can get it on the camera well enough or not, but this is what it looks like. It's an extension of one of their tree houses.
Because they lived like 40 feet up in the
Oh, yes, but
trees.
They really did not think that they would be able to build this. But Don and Carol assured them that, yes, they would. It was just an expansion of what they had built since the beginning of time. So that's how it all came about. But this building that they built will seat just literally hundreds of villagers to receive the gospel of Jesus Christ. So
That is so exciting to see what can happen by God opening the doors and the dedication of a couple like the Richardsons, that they did persevere. And it seems like God comes through a lot of times like that. You know, they were ready to leave, and then
they had become so discouraged.
And sometimes we become discouraged. We think that we're striving and striving, and we just cannot see a peephole of light in our lives of what the next step should be in our own personal ministries, our own personal world of what why am I here, Lord? You know, what is my next step? It seems like sometimes we tread water for so many times of days, years of our life where we want to know what the next step is, and that helps by having an understanding of the peace
I just
child.
hope that one of my prayers for myself and my family this year is that we can become, as the Swayi people this Christmas, and realize that what Christmas is really all about is the peace child. And it's not just the tinsel and the baubles and the glitter and all of that, but that we can become as the Swayi people and just look to Christ as our answer to peace within our hearts.
And when we want to know even more about that, well, we can read it in Luke 2 and a lot of the stories of the Christ child. And Gerry Barnes, thank you so much for coming and sharing the peace child, how that it opened the door for our peace child, the Lord Jesus Christ, to reign in their hearts. And we hope that it reigns in your heart this Christmas season. I'm Bonnie Libhart along with Gerry Barnes here on Vision Plus, and bless your heart for watching.
Give him praise. Come into his presence with thanksgiving in your heart. Your voices raised. Your voices raised. Give glory and honor and power unto him. Jesus, the name above all names. Come into his presence with thanksgiving in your heart and give him praise. And give him praise. Come into his presence with thanksgiving in your heart. Your voice is raised. Your voice is raised.